standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus, episode 676. This is a follow-up, if you will, to episode 675. If you haven't listened to it, I would recommend perhaps take the time to go back and listen to that. We went about 45 minutes in that one. Today, I'm going to try and be 35 minutes. And unfortunately, due to circumstances, this will not even get out until Saturday. So bear with me. It is technically coming out on the 2nd of September, but you will not hear it until the 3rd of September. All right. So the previous episode was, where are we? Right? Trying to figure out where exactly are we at. And I will admit right now that, if you could go back and edit your own episode or add to it, it'd be really tempting because there were some things I left out, some things I truncated, some things that maybe I didn't even do a good job of explaining what I was trying to get at. That's the nature. You don't rehearse. You don't necessarily document everything you're going to say. You just roll with it. At some point, perhaps I'll graduate to a radio program where I get callers and, we can go back and forth. But for now, we're going to just continue on the podcast vein here, which is a monologue. And quite frankly, 30 to 40 minute monologue is both a challenge and a joy at times. Before we get there, let me remind you. Yes, that's right. We got to do the reminder. Like, share, subscribe to this here podcast. Every little bit helps. The shadow ban is real. The algorithms do not work in our favor. And I need your help. And that's the best way, the best thing you can do for me. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for really anything other than like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, join me on the social media of your choice. A reminder, I have a page and a group at Facebook. I am a pro at Gab. I drop in at MeWe. And for now, you can still find most of these programs up on YouTube. Okay, so here we go. Now that we know generally where we're at, and let me encapsulate where we're at. We're in the negative world, if you will, courtesy of Aaron Wren. We're in a trash world, if you will, courtesy of Andrew Iskar. We are in the postmodern milieu, if you will. I think that's the word I want to use. Milieu, whatever. We're in a postmodern dystopia. How about that? Where nothing is true. Nothing is real. Nothing seems to have a static and firm grasp of what's going on. And everything's open to question. That's kind of where we're at. The inversion is complete. Well, not entirely, but for all intents and purposes, the inversion is done, right? And you may recall I assigned the letters of DEI to diversion, exclusion, and inversion, right? Divert your attention, exclude your input, and invert the situation. The whole concept of calling evil good and good evil, right wrong, wrong right, up down, down up, that kind of whole thing. That's played out. It's in real time a done deal, or very nearly a done deal in the world we live in. So now that we know this, we understand this, and we even have a slight of a hand going on in that the chosen one from the Democrat Party is being swapped out by yet another chosen one from the Democrat Party. The party that claims to save democracy is going to do it with no vote whatsoever. Now let that sink in. Meanwhile, the other party, my party, is equally disconnected from the people that support it and vote for it and, make it possible, make it a viable party, if you will. How do you fix that? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay. So, where do we go? right? That's cut to the chase, Callus. Give us the answer. Well, it's not that simple. As another podcaster likes to say, it depends. And I believe that's true with pretty much everything in life. It does depend on what you want and what the underlying problems are. But here we go. So I am going to give you the 3 simplistic options, right? You can forget about it. You can take flight, or you can fight. So forget, flight, and fight. Yes, it's done on purpose, the 3 Fs. Okay, now when I say forget about it, to be clear, I don't think that the people that are taking this tactic necessarily, quote unquote, forget, but they forget that they have a responsibility, that they have an authority, that they have, the ability to do something about it. They're just basically giving up, or in some instances, tossing that responsibility onto somebody else or something else. Let me give, 2 brief examples, and then I'll spend a little bit more time about why I think this is a problem and obviously not a good option. Okay, so when you want to forget about things, right? You want to separate yourself. You don't want to think about it. You want to just not take part. This, I guess, goes back to the whole idea where people just don't want to think about politics. They don't care about politics. They want to separate themselves. And this is not my phrase. It's nothing unique, but the idea is you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And I say that many, many times early on in this show, and I will bring it back as it's necessary. You don't really get that option. You don't get to ignore everything. You don't get to walk away. You don't get to pretend that it doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. But when you ignore it, right? And this, in many ways, is accomplished in a couple of different ways. There's minimization, equivocation, just dismissal, right? And I got to say, I see a lot of this in the evangelical churches. I see it from a lot of what I would call weak pastors, or weak leaders, maybe would be a better way to phrase it. They want to claim to be apolitical, but nothing's apolitical. Nothing. Now, you can say something's nonpartisan, but again, we all know that's not true, but people at least pretend to be nonpartisan or pretend to rise above things. But we all know it's mostly for show, right? It's like the idea that occasionally I have to take a position where I'm officially neutral, right? Well, of course I have an opinion. Of course I have a preference, but the duty involved or the job that's at play here requires me to take a stance of being objective or neutral. So I do that, and I do it to the best of my ability, but I don't hide the fact, because I'd be, lying to everybody, that I don't have a preference. And I try and state, when given the chance, of course I have a preference. I'm going to try and keep it to myself. If you figure out what that preference is, that's fine. But the real takeaway here is, am I looking to influence what your opinion is? Am I looking to push you one way or the other? Because it doesn't really matter what I think or what I believe if you're an individual adult and you're supposed to be coming up with your own decision. And you're supposed to have your own answers, right? Unless, of course, you just so value my opinion or my thoughts on something that you immediately dismiss your own for mine. Well, in which case that could be a danger, but I highly doubt that's a reasonable expectation, that the average person's going to just willingly toss aside everything that they think and they believe because somebody else tells them differently. Although, as an interesting aside, I did observe this within this last year. In the primary for the Republican Party, Vivek Ramaswamy kind of painted himself as the most Trump-like option that we had that wasn't Trump. And people actually were in on that. Yeah, that's a good thing. We like that. We like this guy. Vivek's got a lot of traction here. Until Trump decided to say, well, no, he's not one of us. Oh, well, then immediately everybody dismissed him, tossed him to the side, and the poll numbers crashed. Until a couple of weeks later, well, you know what? In further review, I, the Donald, decide that he's an okay guy, and maybe I'll have him come join our team. Well, then immediately and magically, he's newly reborn as an American First guy. I mean, I know that stuff happens on the left all the time, but it was just amazing to me to watch it happen on my own team. But yet it did. We can't deny it. Why do I bring this up? Because, again, everything has some political or governmental finger in it, and you can't just ignore it. You can't pretend it doesn't there. All right. The other piece of this is some people think if you just do nothing, right? You don't get involved, you stay out of it, you can somehow stay out of the fray, rise above it, whatever. And again, I see this a lot from the same crowd. Well, if we just don't put ourselves in the middle here, then they're not going to train their guns on us. And we're talking metaphorically here, right? They're not going to come after us. We're not going to be seen as their enemy. Or if we are, we're a low priority target. To me, that just, I don't get it. I don't get it. When you are a member of an organization or you run an organization, you have a great deal of influence in people's lives, your day-to-day lives, and you just sit there and tell them, no, stay out of this. We don't have any official opinion. We don't think anything about this. We're not going to try and guide you. We're not going to give you any official teaching. Yeah, you see exactly who I'm blaming here, don't you? Yeah. And in large part, it is the churches. The church is supposed to be the vanguard for our culture and our civilization. Apparently, they weren't up to the task. And when I say that, I mean the American evangelical churches as a group. And yes, it's a very gross way to explain things, right? It's just a massive, thick, broad stroke of paint. We're saying they're all the same, but we know they're not, right? Come on, we're all adults here. We get there's exceptions to the rule. We get that not everything's the same. This broad generalization is used for the purposes of understanding that really nobody's innocent here. The whole third way business. Now, I listened to multiple podcasts, and they assured me that as good Christians, there's problems on the right and there's problems on the left, so we should just stay out of it altogether. Well, yeah, that may be true, but one group, or one party, if you will, has basically named you as their number one enemy, and they celebrate murder. So I'm not really sure why you're supposed to be okay with that. I'm not really sure why we're turning a blind eye to that. But again, evangelical America, that's what we do. Now, to be fair, the Republican Party, the other party, we've got our own problems. And apparently now we're drifting into becoming pro-choice on top of it all. But the vast majority of us still fully understand that killing a baby in the womb or out of the womb is still murder. And there are a lot of things that we ought not be doing that are just bad ideas. And we're morally and culturally on the same page. And we understand that the leaders of our party don't want to talk about that icky stuff because they might lose a couple of votes. But the bigger problem is they might lose a whole lot more votes because people just choose to stay home because they're not excited about what their options are. Again, the idea that you can do nothing. Well, it's not going to work. Yeah, okay. So I was disappointed that the Donald was not who I wanted him to be. Or I was disappointed that Ted Cruz wasn't a 10 out of 10 on everything. So I'm going to stay home. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to cede that battle. I'm going to hand it over to my enemies. Really? That was a good option, wasn't it? Hey, but now you're going to be that low priority target, don't you know? That'll work out real well for you. All right. I think I covered that. Just the notion that you can forget about things. I think I've dismissed that, but hey, look, this is an option a lot of people take. And quite frankly, a lot of churches have defaulted to this. And not even just the churches, but their leadership. I think that's really bad leadership, but that's what we get. Perhaps they're just more worried about butts and seats and bills in the basket. But that's just my thought on that matter. All right. So option number 2. Flight. So there's 2 different ideas to this, right? And full disclosure, we've talked about this before. I've just chosen to label it this way. So in flight, you would say this section of our state or this city within our state or country is untenable. We can't stay here any longer. The communists run it, whatever your pejorative of choice is, the progressive, leftist, socialist, whatever. They run the city. There's absolutely nothing we can do. There's no way to fight back. They have a giant majority. All is lost. We're going to go to the next county over or the other side of the state. Or we're going to look for the least blue or the most socially conservative, or however you want to phrase it, area within this state. And we're going to go there and we're going to build upon that. And we're going to form our own redoubt, right? We're going to build it up, get our own businesses, get everything that's being done there to encourage other people that are like-minded to come here, join us, and make our stand and fight the good fight and do a good job. Essentially, you're offering a real-time alternative to the leftist, progressive, socialist sludge that is running the largest city or the capital or whatever the situation is within your state or country, right? You're offering a direct conflict of ideas, a direct conflict of where you want to go. But you're not taking active conflict. In other words, you're not fighting fisticuffs, maybe not even legal battles. You're just saying, yeah, you guys can do whatever you want in Chicago, but here in Southern Illinois, we're going to do whatever we want. We're not worried about what you guys do up in Chicago. Now, it's got its pluses and minuses, but it becomes a active rebellion in part, right? People like to talk about the Moscow mood or what's going on in Moscow, Idaho. And there's some other things that get brought up from time to time, different cities or places. But what you've got here is a group of people, in this case, mostly all Presbyterians, hardcore, people that want to take a stand. They want to create their Christ-like culture, in the Snake River Valley or whatever it is there. I guess that may be Palouse, whatever. Moscow, Idaho, right? So they're fighting the good fight. They're showing up and they're staking their claim and they're pushing back and they're doing it to represent their people. And you're free to go join them if that's, they're part of your faith or part of your team, however you want to phrase it. They're actively recruiting. They're fighting the good fight. They're not so much worried about what's going on in the state capital per se, but they're looking at making political inroads. They're making business inroads all within the city, and they're building out an opportunity to take a stand. And this is within the context of a geographic area within a otherwise friendly state. The idea of a redoubt, just where you have a strong cultural influence, where the people are already generally aligned with you. And you can't win in Chicago, but you might be able to win in Moscow. You can't win in Dallas, but you might win in McKinney. Well, that maybe isn't true anymore, but go with me here. Austin's lost, but Fort Worth is not. This is the kind of mindset here, right? A little intra-state geographic location to strengthen the area that you're living in. An example of this in Texas would be Montgomery County. Montgomery County, they're pushing. They're doing great things down there. I'm trying to model what we're doing in Collin County off of the successes that they've had down in Montgomery County. I think we can do a good job if we just put aside these things. And I'm going to get to an explanation, if you will, here in just a second. Well, probably not a second. Towards the end. All right, so... And certainly when it comes to flight, the next option that comes to mind, and this is where I got to be careful, because when you talk about secession, right, separation, a national divorce, this is the long-term outgrowth when you have irreconcilable differences or visions for your country, for your state. Maybe it's best we go our own separate ways. We can no longer live together. We can't be on the same team. The Bible talks about being unequally yoked, and I would say to you that the state of Illinois is unequally yoked with Chicago and the surrounding areas. Right? Cook County, Illinois is an anchor to the entirety of the state of crime, corruption, and quite frankly, socialism. It is also their biggest source of income. It is also their biggest population center. It has also got a lot of quote-unquote fringe benefits to it, but there's a cost. At that point, you got to determine, are our people best off fully separated and becoming their own entity? Whereas in the redoubt situation, you're staying part of the entity, but you're separating within it. This is, the next step of flight. We're going to go our own way. A lot of people think about the notion of Texas going its own way. Well, yeah, I think that's definitely an option, and it's something we need to be supporting as far as looking into it. I'd like to think we don't get there, that we don't have to do that, but I certainly want to have that option and have everything in place in case we're given no other choice. And you'd be foolish not to want to do that. It's just smart planning and smart thinking. Again, we're talking about where are we going to go. Texas is by itself pretty much already a redoubt for these United States. There's tons of people fleeing here from their own bad states. Unfortunately, they don't leave all that garbage from their previous bad state in that other bad state. They bring it with them. But, that's the cost of success to a degree. Just saying. Okay, so I think I covered flight fairly well. Just the idea that you've got the redoubt notion, right? Stand where you're at and toughen it up and fight the good fight on location. And then the separate. We've already lost. There's nothing further that can be done. We're going to become our own thing, or we're going to start our own thing over here. Also, maybe the notion of take my ball and go home. All right. Now we have the third way to deal with things, or where to go, if you will, fight. Right? And again, this can mostly be thought of as a metaphorical thing, but we're looking at all things legal, all things productive in fighting. Now, when you fight, there's a notion in war of total war, right? Clausewitz and what's the other guy? But these people have theorized what's all at play here. When you're at war, what's the limits? What can we possibly do? What's off limits? Well, I'm going to tell you that hopefully we never get there. I know that many people would say that World War I and certainly World War II were pretty darn close examples of that. But I'm trying to think of it as something less than war. Politics is war by other means, and war is politics by other means. What do we do to avoid the inevitable war, whether it's a metaphorical war of words or war of bullets? Well, here's where it gets interesting. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can just, it just basically boils down to strategy, right? You can either have a strategic oversight of what you want to do, and I hate to say it, but this is being led from the top down. And when you're in war, you need to be led from the top down. You need to have a commander-in-chief. You need to have, good, solid subordinates. You need to understand what the game plan is and move towards it, right? So, love them or hate them, you had Ike in the European theater, and then you had MacArthur in the Pacific theater. They were like the guys in charge of everything. All the grand strategy went through them. They planned it out. That being said, they had other generals that were answering to them that could have been in charge in their own right, but they were better focused on other things. I mean, if you're fighting mostly a naval war and you got Bull Halsey, yeah, that's the guy you want leading the attack. If you've got Chester Nimitz, then maybe that's the guy you want overseeing and doing different things. I think they actually split the Pacific to the northern and the southern. Nimitz might have run the north, but it's been a while. I'm a little foggy on that. But certainly in the European theater, you've got Montgomery and you've got Patton and a couple other guys that are getting deployed to go tear things up, to prepare the ground. But they're not necessarily the grand strategists. They're not necessarily the people that can see the whole big picture. And I would submit to you, I don't think any one man can do that. I think the Germans figured this out earlier on, I think in the late 1800s, and they came up with the notion of a general staff, right? So you've got a guy that is the titular head of this, and he's got a number of people that work with him, that are subordinate to him. And yes, I know, ladies, fine. Some women, we're not going to go in there. Just men in the generic term here, okay? But they have the notion and they have a task to dream up how are we going to do this, and then what are the smaller pieces that need to be accomplished in order to get the big picture here. And I'm going to suggest to you, when we look at these United States and then Texas, a lot of what happens in Collin County is extremely important. And if we don't take the time to set aside and come up with a grand plan on how we're going to do things and implement different things, have that general staff, if you will, that going to lay out a plan from start to finish of where we're going and what we're doing, you're never, ever going to achieve your goals. All right, so just for clarification, when I say grand plan, I mean, that oversells it, right? That overshoots the mark. What I mean is, if you don't know what it is you're trying to achieve, and if you can't break it down into sizable objectives, and if you can't come up with a way to achieve those objectives until you get to the next size objective and then start executing that, you're going to be in trouble. And the other part about that is it takes time. You don't achieve something overnight. That never happens. You know, you hear of all these quote unquote overnight successes, but what you don't hear is the 8, 10, 20 years in the background that they've been busting their butts to get it. Now they might finally achieve, status of success in a relatively short period of time, but they're ignoring everything that went on beforehand. So when I look at my county and I see what's changed in the less than 30 years that I've been here, we've had great success. We've had a lot of people move in. We've had, high caliber school districts and nice cities and all these great things. And more people moved in and more people moved in and more business moved in and moved their people with them. And then you've got a giant transient population. That is people that come in for 3 to 5 years, maybe as much as 10, but they have zero interest in staying long term. They don't care about the consequences of their choices and their behaviors while they're here. And when you lop off the institutional knowledge, when you ignore those people that have long roots here, when you reorg and reorientate the entirety of an area, of a city, there are long-term consequences that really haven't even been thought out yet. Now, when you then turn around and try and sell the idea that we're going to return you to what you had, right? I mean, that if you want to know, I think that's really the hardest thing about quote unquote conservatism is what are you conserving? What are you trying to prevent from happening? Most of the time, the change has already occurred. By the time conservatives, quote unquote, get around to fighting back or standing up against something, the battle's already been lost. And they dismiss concerns or ideas by going with the slippery slope trope, right? Well, that's not happening yet. No, that's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. And yet here we are. Here we are. See, when I look at this, and we've already established that we lost. And when I say we lost, it means we lost a battle. We're in a bad spot. I've given you the 3 primary options of how to get out of it or what to do about it. And one needs to be dismissed immediately, and the other 2 have some viable options. But here's the other part of this. When you fight, there's a cost. When you fight back, people lose. People have consequences, whether it's to their life, not life as in dead, but just outcomes, and monetary and, quite frankly, political, social costs as well. I mean, have you ever wondered why so many people are fearful to say what they really think or what they really believe? They'd be ostracized by their friends and their family, or perhaps people in the general public. I mean, I just consider what we went through a little over 4 years ago. We had people acting like little HOA Nazis running around busting people for not wearing a mask over their face. And while that was egregious, foolish, and terrible, those people have had no consequences. Those people were supposed to give a free pass. Yet if you were one of the ones that said, yeah, no, I'm out. I'm just not going to partake in that. I don't want to cover my face anymore, or I don't want to put something in my body that we don't know what it is or what its long-term consequences are. There was a cost for those people. There was a consequence. Now, some of those people are maybe sort of being made whole, or at least being compensated for their loss, for the cost associated with that. But for the general public, there was nothing. Indeed, we gave a certain amount of credit to our own school district when they decided, okay, enough was enough. We're going to open the schools back up. Let's go back to school. But I think that was really motivated by the fact that there's a whole lot of parents that found out exactly what was going on in those schools, what was going on in those classrooms. What little Johnny and little Mary was learning was not exactly what mom and dad had intended or thought. Indeed, we've watched the growth of homeschooling and private schools skyrocket in the aftermath of the nonsense of 2020. So that, in a sense, is a way of fighting back. And when we talk about fighting back, it's not always just political. I mean, if you're separating out and starting your own school, right, you're fighting back. If you're creating a parallel economy that only works on cash, you're fighting back. The folks that are utilizing and implementing the use of, let's call them Bitcoin and its alternatives, while that's not my favorite thing, it is fighting back. It is an alternative. Now, are there some giant concerns I have when it comes to that? Yeah, there is. But concerns shouldn't preclude action. Concerns shouldn't be used as an excuse to do nothing. When we look at the notion that we have schools that are actually losing students while the population is growing, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on there. And honestly, there's not been a lot of good stewardship in a lot of entities, right? The federal government metaphorically cranked up the printing press. More accurately, they just created money out of thin air, and all the cities and the school districts lined up for that quote-unquote free money, started a whole bunch of programs and things to be implemented that they had no way of paying for long term. Now, the feds, they love this because it makes you more reliant on them. It makes you subservient to them. But if you're truly an independent school district, how can you do that if 60% of your budget's coming from the state? How can you do that if you're dependent on the feds to give you matching funds for certain things? Well, tell me, what exactly is independent left in that? Right? So when you create something new, when you opt out, that is fighting back. There was a pretty significant move out of the cities in the aftermath of the lockdowns in 2020. And a lot of people said, well, I can work remotely from home because now my employer figured out that's viable. So there's no reason for me to live in a suburb. I can go out to some rural territory. Now, the consequences and the cost of that was prices skyrocketed. It's really expensive to live in certain areas now that were never historically expensive. And I got to be honest, most of the people that moved out there, they had zero interest in actually becoming part of that community. They had zero interest about contributing to society there. They just wanted to get out of town. They wanted to be able to, quote, live their own life. They wanted the independence. And to a degree, I respect that and I expect that. But the flip side is, when you join a community, you need to join the community. When I look at the time that I've been here in McKinney and some of the things I've done to integrate myself into the community that was, in different interactions and activities that I've done, whether it was serving on some of the park boards, whether it was being involved in my church, whether it was serving at the schools that my kids went to, whether it was being a band dad, all these different things. You do it for your family, but you also do it for the community as a whole. Everybody's supposed to benefit. You're supposed to kind of rally around some of these things, these common ideas that everybody wants to see do well. But when they take those away, when they punish you for not following, their specifics that they wanted out of that, what do? This is your parallel society here. I mean, it's an outgrowth, right? It's part of fighting back. The other thing you can do to fight back. So there is I guess I'll just say a vocal minority of progressives that took over, more or less, a city near me. And when I say city, I mean just small town. And conservatives, as usual, were late to the party. And this went down. And then when they tried to run against it, they had no game plan. They had no real idea how they were going to do it. Now, in a city like that, where it's already 65% of the people, should they show up and vote, are going to be supportive of your ideas and what you want, but they're oblivious. They don't see it. They don't care. They don't show up. And the leftist progressive socialists, they hold on and they fight tooth and nail. They're not giving up anything. They want their control. When you fight back, you've got to be smart. You got to have a plan. You got to know how to do it. And you got to know the ground you're fighting on. So just because something worked in that little town doesn't mean it's going to work in Plano, Texas. And perhaps even if they figure out a winning strategy in Plano, which they really haven't yet, but if they should, there's no guarantee that that works in Prosper or in Murphy. Every city, every locality is slightly different. But if you're not aware of that, and you can't adjust the tactics, and you can't deploy different people to do different things there, you're not going to be able to successfully fight back. What this really boils down to, folks, is it's not right or left anymore. And I'm not going to take credit for this. I got this from John Harris on the Conversations That Matter podcast, and I think he may have gotten it from somebody else. But the notion of, are they a friend or not? Because I have people I know that I would say are moderates, right? They're not as quote unquote extreme as I might be on various issues, but they wouldn't throw me under the bus. They wouldn't abandon me. They wouldn't rat me out. That's a friend. In fact, I'm fairly certain that I might know a person or two out there that is probably left of center. Not a crazy leftist, progressive, socialist, but, left of center. Just, I don't know that I want to put them to that test, but I don't see any evidence to suggest that they throw me under the bus, that they would rat me out. But I do know people, and I do have what I'll call acquaintances that are, 5% different than me. We're aligned on so many issues, yet they behave like I'm the enemy. They rat me out. They work out their frustrations. Let's put it that way. They come after me. They come after the people I'm working with. They see me as an enemy. At that point, I would be a fool not to understand that this person is not friendly. This person is somebody that needs to be removed. And when I mean removed, just removed from a position of influencing what I'm doing or what I want to see done. Don't read into that any more than just removed from the situation. There we go. We're going to go with that. Removed from the situation. Unfortunately, I see a lot of that. People that should be excited to get certain things done, that should be on the same team, that should be very interested in a strategy or a plan to get things done, to win the battles, and because you slighted them or you didn't do something the way they thought it should have been done, nope, We're going to knife you in the back. We're going to rat you out. We're going to torpedo your plan. We're going to stymie any actions. We're going to prevent you from being successful because we don't want you to get any credit for anything. And when we say that's about me, it's not really about me. It's about the team I belong to. And God forbid our team would be successful because that would undermine their story. You think I'm not being fair? Well, I'm telling you, that's exactly what we're watching play out right now. In fact, I got a guy that every once in a while will comment on my podcast. To the best of my knowledge, the guy has no first-hand information on anything. Now, that's okay. There's tons of things I get on second and third hand. So I'm aware, but I'm not directly aware. So I need to be careful on how I handle those things. But just commentary that's, quite frankly, missing the point, or, if you will, saw the point and just completely ignored it. That's not somebody that I want leading anything, quite frankly. That's a person that I see as the problem. So when we look at that, the notion of where are we going, right? So I would like for most of everybody listening to me to understand that forgetting about it, that's not a viable option. Flight is a viable option if there's really no realistic way to win. If you live in the Northeast or you live in Illinois, quite frankly, Michigan, Wisconsin, any number of those states where you got one city that's just giant and dominates everything else that goes on in the state, yeah, I mean, flight becomes a very viable option. Maybe not quite to the point of an individual state going and parting ways with these United States, but I'm open to that, right? But if you're in a state that's quote unquote a swing state or right of center state, and you're getting overrun with leftist, progressive, socialist mindset, primarily because you didn't do what you should have done with the school district decades ago, you're going to have to fight. Don't waste your time just, rolling out ineffective strategies. Don't assume that because something worked in one town, it was going to work in yours. Think about the strategy involved. Think about what do you have to work with. Think about what can we do now that's going to pay a dividend later. And there may only be a couple little things that you can do now. And you're opening a door, you're propping open something, you're presenting something, you're planting those seeds, if you will, right? The seeds that are planted now may not pop out and grow for 2 years. But if you don't do it now, if you don't start making little changes now, you're never going to get a chance to see the outcome. And don't be afraid to attack multiple fronts. And again, this is a metaphor here, folks. Look at the funding. Look at the support. Look at the media. Look at the messaging. Look at the ground game. Look at all these different things. And maybe reconsider what you're doing. Like, I'll tell you, I'm a member of a club. That club has been more or less on hiatus for about 18 months. Right, wrong, or otherwise, that's just the situation that we're living in. There are several other clubs in the area that, quite frankly, do virtually the same thing that we do. When you're going to be doing duplicative stuff that clearly isn't working, perhaps you need to reconsider what exactly it is that you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe you need to retool. Perhaps if you're a tad less partisan and a little bit more personal, you'll meet greater success. Perhaps if you worry less about the R after the name and whether or not they're friends, people you can trust, you'll be in a better position. The only way you can win over people is getting to know them first. I don't think we do a good job of that either. So when we're talking about building alternative or parallel institutions, if you will, you have to build something or create something that's actually worthy of people's time and effort and interest. And how do you do that? Where do you do that? What does it look like? It's going to be different everywhere you're at. Now, those folks in Moscow, Idaho, the vast majority of which are Presbyterian, yeah, that's not really my thing. I am not a Presbyterian. There's a couple things I just cannot get on board with. But you know what? Those people, whether they know it or not, they're my friends. I trust them. I think they're doing a good thing. I am encouraged by what they're doing. If I knew of more examples, I would give them to you. Oh, I do have one, right? There's this guy, Joel Salatin. If you haven't heard of him, you need to go look him up. He's got a farm. I want to say it's in Virginia. And he's doing what he needs to do. But he has his own little community on that farm where he's basically said, yeah, you can come here, but what are you going to do while you're here? What are you going to do to add value? I think if we looked at our clubs and our groups and quite frankly, our entire civilization is, what are you doing to add value? And how can we help you become a person that adds value? That might be a better way to observe things. That might be a better way to take shape in these things. And yeah, in case you haven't figured out, I'm tired. I've been dragging. It's been a long week. And no apologies. I'm just going to say that's what it is. Everybody's getting pulled 6 ways from Sunday, and we're all doing everything that we can. And right now, you can feel good. You can feel confident that, hey, in November, we're going to fix all of our problems. I don't know if I feel that way. But we're going to prevent more problems, right? If the good guys win. Yeah, but there's no guarantee the good guys win. We've got to get 250,000 votes out of Collin County for Ted Cruz. It has to be done. How do we do it? Well, I'll tell you one way we're not going to do it. It's bickering and fighting and having stupid little drama things going on at the county party that's supposed to be leading the charge. When we can't even get basic functions taken care of in not one but 2 meetings because people won't set aside their egos, that's a problem. And I'm counting on the executive committee to finally have enough of it and put their foot down and say, no, this is what we're doing. We're moving forward. And whether these few people like it or not, too bad. This is what has to happen. When you say liberty lives here, it's actually now liberty's on the line. I mean, that's what we're dealing with, folks. I mean, if we can't win Collin County and win it significantly, you can't hold Texas. If you don't hold Texas, what's left of our country isn't going to be worth fighting for, if you want my opinion. At least if you're right of center. And that's not a black pill. That's just the reality. We've established where we're at. I've given you opportunities to think about where do you want to go and how are we going to get there. I know where I'm standing. I know what I'm doing. I'm asking you, consider your options. Pick one, move forward, and let's get this done. And with that, this has been According to Callus. And I will see you on the other side.
TexianPride.com is the destination for Texans who want to show off their love for Texas. We don't settle for mediocre. Our shirts are made from 100% high-quality athletic cotton. They're cool, comfortable, and designed to fit and flatter any body type. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit TexianPride.com for your next stylish Texas tee.